This is Shiki.
And this is Martin.
Welcome back to our podcast. So today we're going to be talking about Balthus, who I am not particularly familiar with, and it is a choice of Martin. So I will very quickly just pass it on to Martin to talk about and give us a little introduction to Balthus, who he is, and what sort of painting he makes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that to me, Balthus was an easy choice because I think his reputation, it's somewhat mixed nowadays in that, some people consider him among the most talented and interesting figurative painters of the 20th century, whereas you also have some people throwing accusations at him that he's a pedophile or that his work is troubled to the extent such that it should not be shown in public museums. We will delve into these questions later on, but perhaps just let me start with introducing Balthus.
Yes, do let me know who is Balthus.
Well, perhaps I can start with his biography. So he was born in Paris to German parents, German-Polish parents, I should say. His mother was, we think, a descendant of Lithuanian Jews, and his father, Erich Klossowski, was a painter and art historian. He grew up in an artistic surrounding in Paris, considering Rilke, Maurice Denis, and Pierre Bonnard among figures that frequented his household. And on the onset of the First World War, his family had to flee because of their German passports. And so from then onwards, he really spent I'd say he had a quite troubled childhood, living between Berlin and then Switzerland. Her parents separated, then his mother had an affair with Rainer Maria Rilke, and I think he must have felt quite torn. Moving forward, I'd say he really achieved his first artistic success in the early 1930s in Paris, where he made paintings that are quite sexually charged. So there's, for instance, this one famous painting of his from 1934 called The Guitar Lesson, which features a music teacher fondling a young girl's genitalia with the instrument lying on the floor. The composition is somewhat reminiscent of a Pietà of the Virgin Mary holding Jesus when he comes off the cross. And so from the 1930s he really made a name for himself, admired by the Surrealists, by Giacometti, by Picasso, André Breton, but yet he was also a very confrontational and controversial figure. So for instance, in his first significant show in 1934, the Guitar Lesson could not be shown in public. It was shown in a hidden room. And so moving forward, obviously in the 1940s you had the Second World War, so then he had to flee to Switzerland. And so I'd say from the 1940s onwards his work became less confrontational, and I'd say there's still, sexually these works are often quite revealing or quite, filled with allusions, sexual allusions. But I think gradually, particularly also from the 1950s and 60s, there's a more decorative element with the artist trying to really capture the light and the different textures in a composition. Perhaps more reminiscent of Les Nabis painters such as Bonnard or what have you.
Interesting.
And
so from the very little research I've done on this artist, I watched the beginning of a documentary, I think was made when he was still alive, and there was some interviews with him, and he kept on saying how he's like, my works are not erotic at all. I'm just painting the cats and the girls as they are, and how people always say the cat is like a symbolic of some sort of erotic behavior, but actually I'm just painting what it is as it is seen in the young girl's eyes. It's like, if you're gonna see these things as erotic symbols, that's your fault, and it's Freud's fault for psychoanalysis and whatever. And so it seems that he doesn't want to be associated or portrayed as painting something erotic, but even though that his work such like young girls with their legs all wide open, it's a bit unreasonable to say that it's not erotic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think really at the heart of Balthus as a character, there's an element of concealment, and I think probably he wants us to be talking about his work and throwing these accusations at him just so that he can deny them in a stubborn, innocent fashion. I think his work is most certainly erotic, but it's not always fully confrontationally erotic. I mean, there's almost something believable about his defense, because he never shows people in
full action,
as it were, and there's always something quite suggestive and mysterious. So, for instance, in a painting I very much love called Thérèse Dreaming, you see a girl leaning on a chair, her hands on top of her head, looking sideways, and her legs exposed such that we see her underwear. Meanwhile, in the left of the composition, in one of the corners, we see a cat drinking milk passionately, and it's in a way suggesting oral sex, because you don't need a lot of imagination to imagine that the cat is perhaps a human, and he is performing oral sex on the young girl, but it's not right there yet. I mean, it's not
suggestive,
descriptively in the picture, but yet it is very much suggested, and in a way, I mean, I think he's definitely a narcissist, and he likes to be the center of attention while denying it. And so I think that's also reflected in his biography. There are actually very few accurate biographic facts around his life. He famously claimed that he was born on the 29th of February, which is a day that only occurs, I believe, every 4 years. He claimed that he is of, that he's a Polish count of high pedigree, when yet no one else from his family carried the title de Rola, and to the best of our understanding, his mother was a Lithuanian Jew, and his father was originally of Polish descent, but not really of noble descent, as it were. I think that there's always a game of concealing himself, and so I think in a way that his kind of style of painting these young women, it must be said, I think that serves that purpose. It should also perhaps be said that only in the 1930s in the 1930s when he was still young, his work was the most explicit, and I think maybe it can also be seen within the context of this youthful figure who really tries to leave an impression and tries to create a shock reaction. And later on in his career, he still painted nude women, but it was far more decorative, I would say.
Interesting. So what did you find that's most interesting about his work? One thing that I've gathered from your description of Balthus would be that there's this feeling of stagedness and concealment, and kind of the figures in there, they don't want to show you who they are, what they are actually doing, even though they're kind of in these quite stage and dramatic positions, but they're not really, you can't really tell what they are actually doing and what's the intention of these figures. And what I found quite interesting in those descriptions is that it seems like this sort of suggestive element that they lead you to imagine something, but it's not very clear. You can't pin it down. And that actually made me think of the sort of allegorical works that you'd see in, the Dutch Golden Ages. You would have genre paintings very much like Balthus' work. They would have, maids, and like the maids are often the main figures in these works. Like Vermeer, you would always have like this young woman next to the window and reading a love letter. But it's often more explicit in what they are trying to say. They would have these codes of like, the angel means what, the window means what, the letter means what, like all of these actions. They play a role, and then they show you an allegorical story or a moral story of a teaching.
Yeah.
But like in that Balthus, it's not about teaching, obviously. There's no moral stories behind it. It's much more, it's more amoral, I'd say. Like it's almost like going against the grain of the social norms. And I'd say that kind of they're sort of very realistic pictures, but of like the way that he paints is very realistic, naturalistic, but the content of it's really art for art's sake content. That's
true, but I wouldn't even say that it's always realistic. I think what I personally like about these paintings is their riddledness, their element of suggestion, that things aren't just given to you in a very straightforward, matter-of-factly way. But I think I think there's also something quite... I think the way he paints actually serves that purpose as well. I think it is, on the one hand, very realistic, but I think there are also these strange elements that in a way also suggest and remove you from a realistic portrayal of the world. I mean, many of the women he paints, particularly in his later oeuvre, they look like things, or he has like this kind of little golem character in several of his paintings, including The Street, like a little boy with an overly, with an enlarged head, a very small torso, and I think that it's just really quite hard to pin down what his intentions are. I think it's realistic in one sense, innocent in one sense, but then quite unrealistic and obviously, quite seductive and not realistic.
Yeah. No, I mean, what I found quite interesting is that he seems to have used this sort of pictorial mechanism of the allegorical paintings. You put these elements, place them in this picture, in this picture frame, and it makes you try to figure out a story. You see the cat, you see the woman, you see the nakedness, and you just kind of you just start to try to make a story for yourself. But then it's so confusing that you just kind of wonders what is he trying to say, and be a bit scared by that, because you just get a bit creeped out by it. It's like, okay, what is he saying?
Yeah.
I think that element, I guess, is also quite fun. You get a bit like,
Yeah, that's true. There's a certain joy of discovery, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I'm not troubled by the sexual aspects of it. I mean, to me, it probably makes me chuckle more than anything else.
Wow.
But I think that ties into the larger discussion of what we want art to do and be.
One thing that I found quite interesting in his subject matters, with the picture you mentioned with the girl and the cat, and when I saw the girl and the cat, it actually just made me thought of many other forms of art, like in other literature and things, that this element of girl and cat, like a young adolescent girl and a curious cat, is a good combination always. In like in Lewis Carroll, in Alice in the Wonderland, you have the young Alice and the strange cat, and there's also in
Lewis Carroll was also, by the way, accused of pedophilia. I mean,
Yeah,
the story
sure,
was that Alice Little. So Lewis Carroll, he was a mathematician at Christ Church College in Oxford, and the principal of the college was the father of the real Alice Little.
Yeah.
And so he would, take her out on boat trips, take photographs of her. And so that was also an accusation lingering in the room. And in a way, I think it's a very apt comparison, Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. And there's this like
Balthus,
curiosity, this weirdness to it. And there's also, it also reminds me of this Miyazaki Hayao's film, this Ghibli film, where there's this story of the return of the cat. What's it called? The Return of the Cat, or like this story about this girl who goes into this wonderland with of cats world, and it's this magical world of cats, and then it's trying to like this whole exploration story. And he also uses this element of girl and cat a lot, also in like Totoro, this like the figure of Totoro and the cat bus. There's always these young adolescent girls when they go on a exploration of magical trip. There's always
why girl and a cat? What's the significance of that?
I mean, I guess there's always this same feeling that they give out. This character of a cat and a young adolescent girl is also always curious and explore this element of exploration, and they're also a bit ambiguous, and you can't guess what they are thinking. It's not.
That's true. In a way, cats are creatures you can't read their minds, but I think there's a certain feeling of curiosity that
yes.
And in a way, it perhaps goes well with the image of a young girl, in that the cat is really pushing the girl to explore the world, or pushing her boundaries to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think you also see a similar character in a young girl, that you don't know what they're thinking, and especially from the male's perspective, I think that's particularly strong. Yeah. The teenage boys are always scared of teenage girls, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Yeah. But with that thought, then I was kind of thinking further that about like Balthus' image in right now, like how we perceive him and how we perceive his works. Like we actually still see these adolescent girls as a subject matter today. Not in Balthus's work. Not that I'm talking about Balthus, but in other works, like one that I really thought this connection is Anna Weyand.
Okay. Yeah.
And I actually thought their works are very similar. Well, maybe it's not so much on the sexual end, but like in the atmosphere, the ambiguity, the way that she also claims that she paints in this really not like old master way of painting, because she wants to give the work a sense of timelessness, which is also what Balthus kind of talked about, like this timeless realism that he's going for. And like the way that she's also made her work look kind of like stages, and it's always adolescent girls in her work that is the main figure, and so she sort of paints them in these weird positions and have these weird reactions, and it's kind of also ambiguous what story she's telling in the works. But what's interesting is that her works are very, very popular and politically correct.
But I think in a way, I don't think that even if you see a naked woman in, what's her name?
Anna Weyand?
No, the girl she often depicts.
I don't know her name.
Anyway, even though you see a naked woman, and in a way also kind of, I mean, the girl she depicts, it's a quite, it's an adult, it's a full, an adult as it were, but she does have this air of youthful innocence. She does seem like a Lolita kind of.
Yeah, I mean, her earlier works is more obvious, because she has like nude girls, which that's like literally no boobs,
But I think the works aren't as suggestive. I think in a way they're more removed from the real world. They're more I'd say, almost decorative, and I think there's more of a I mean, there's rarely a narrative element. It's more like a snapshot, and it's a celebration of, I'd say to a certain extent, it's a celebration of beauty, and I think it's quite removed from the here and now. And so, further to that, it's also a woman painting her friends, and her peers, as it were. And so I think there's less of a narrative suggestion, and I think people just appreciate her works entirely for their aesthetics, rather than for any narrative elements or whatsoever. But I do think it is an interesting comparison.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the narrative of the author is very different, because she is a young woman who is painting her friends. There's not as much controversy, and it's also not as sexual, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, but no, I just find, I think just this element of this like ambiguity, dark humor with the young girls, it's always something that's interesting.
Yeah.
And people are interested in it. But it also causes controversy when you know that it's like some old white man who's doing it back in the 1930s, and then like with the neighbor's young daughter, and this whole narrative becomes very different when it's a different author doing it.
I think that's one thing, but I think it also really has a lot to do with how it's painted. I mean, I think Anna Wayon's work, it's mysterious, but not really. I mean, I don't think it leads us to think what's portrayed. I mean, I think we accept it as a completely construed image. I mean, with the black background, it's an entirely construed image, and we kind of accept it as an upside down picture of a woman with one breast protruding into the composition and imagery of the work. And I think in a way it's not really that challenging. Therefore, we kind of everything is just presented to us in a quite matter-of-factly way. And I think with Balthus there's a lot more room left for imagination, and I think that's why it's more troubling. Even if someone were to, even if a young woman were to paint like that today, I think it would stir a different reaction. I mean, of course, people would be okay with it, and maybe would see it in the guise of some feminist appropriation of traditionally male subject matter of the reclining nude, yada yada yada, but it would still require a different justification than the work of Anne Wayon, which to me is at its core purely decorative, and it doesn't really leave that many questions of what's going on. Yeah. It's totally construed, and we know it, and it carries its, it has its values on its cuffs, as it were.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's true. So, but Balthus has also had some exposure recently, especially with his painting The Street, and which is, I think, still on show right now at Gagoisan in New York, or has the show closed? It's still on show right now. Yeah. What do you think that's quite still interesting about Balthus for people now?
Well, I think first of all, he's a really great painter in terms of his technique. He was very versatile, looking to the ancients, painting in oil, tempera, distemper. And I think young artists today have been looking to this Le Nabi aesthetic. And so I think if you do that...
What is the Le Nabi aesthetics?
Like Pierre Bonnard and...
what is the aesthetic?
Doig. I think it's a realistic depiction with an imaginative use of colors, but I think there's also something deeply conservative about that leaning, and so it seems quite natural to also look back to the old masters, and I think Balthus then also is a name that is dropped because he in a way is the 20th century realist master who sees himself within the lineage of old master painters in terms of his method and technique and whatsoever. And frankly, I also think young painters are also intrigued by his subject matter. I think there's something quite alluring about his work, and even if in the mainstream it's more challenging. I mean, I don't want to digress, but obviously, MoMA has perhaps one of the best collections of Balthus' work, and I don't think you have a work of his on display right now because it just doesn't fit the tooth of time with, it in a way goes against this idea that art should somehow champion, the ethical values the mainstream cares about at that very moment. I mean, Balthus is at odds with that, the idea that maybe art does not have to respond to some ethical codex of black female, Caribbean, what have you, living together. But yeah, I'm digressing.
Yeah, so I think also this aspect of this surrealist touch to his narrative painting also seems to be quite popular these days with younger artists. So like Anna Wei Yan, there's also this surrealist, flair to it. And yeah, I think...
What's surrealist? I mean, I'm just curious because...
it's surrealist used in a very, very loose manner. Like, it's just this feeling of... It's real, like the way it's being depicted. It's naturalistic, but at the same time, there's something that's a bit off. It's not. You're never gonna see that in real life, sort of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's largely how people use the term surrealist, like these days. It's not in the strictest ways.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point. I mean, are there any younger artists aside from Anne Weyland that you'd see following his footsteps? Maybe it's a too difficult question to ask, just because I think probably the artists today, they have so many influences to draw on. Peter Doig is obviously a name who is also included in the show at Gagoisan, who also kind of mirrors this Le Nabi sensitivity, even though I never really considered Doig a particularly good draughtsman, and so
but I mean, like also the Doig students, I guess. With Sarah Buchner. And
I guess there's also something sexually troubling about her work often.
Yeah.
I mean...
and what's Justin's work as well.
But I think Sarah, there's often something quite troubling in her. I mean, in a way, we also don't really get answers for what we see, but there's also... I mean, you typically have, like, these... How would you describe her work? I mean, often you have.
I mean, it's more like mythical. It's not as set in the real world, but I think the feeling it also gives is this a bit off,
It is a bit off, yes.
But what do you think is so attractive about this ambiguity? Do you think, or do you think we've also covered that at the beginning?
Well, I think it just makes it interesting to talk about and engage with, and you want to look at it repeatedly.
Yeah.
And I think there's also at the heart of it something very fun about leaving things open, and the fact that, I think in whatever realm we engage with, whether it's political rhetoric or art, I think it often just catches our attention, these gestures, these, statements that have a high degree of deniability. I mean, I think if you think of the Bill Clinton presidency, perhaps one of the most memorable moments is when, he denied having a sexual intercourse with Monica Lewinsky because, as it turned out, she only gave him a fellatio, but this doesn't count as sexual intercourse because it was one-sided. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting on his presidential chair while she was doing the work. And I think there's just something quite...
we all like conspiracy theories.
And I think there's just something deeply entertaining about and intriguing about concealment.
Yeah.
In all aspects of life, whether it's dating or even in political rhetoric or, with Bill Clinton or whatnot, I think it just intrigues us. And I think it's also a very curious phenomenon how you can depict something, suggest it such that everyone knows what is going on, yet you can deny it and be like, oh, I'm just, painting a girl with a cat.
Yeah.
And it's your values that you project onto it. I think I think that's just deeply fascinating as a phenomenon, and I think it requires a lot of talent to paint in such a way, to have such control over the narratives you construct in your paintings.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. So, I mean, Balthus is actually born in 1908. 1908, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so his major series came in early 1930s.
Yeah.
So actually a very early figure in terms of 20th century art. So, and he's worked all the way through the wars and then into post-war, and then he passed away in 2001.
Yeah.
Until then, he was also still painting. How do we understand Balthus as a figure in our history? Like, where should we put him? Like, who was he in contact with when he was working back in the days?
Well, I mean, I'd say in terms of influences, I think first and foremost, he was looking to Renaissance painters, most notably Piero della Francesca. I think the figures in Piero della Francesca's work, they often seem quite odd and stiff, like architectural pillars, and the compositions are often very informed by geometry. And I think you see that in Balthus' work. Many of his figures are rather strange creatures. I mean, for instance, in the street, as I already said, you have like this little golem character, and yet there's a great understanding of composition and how to make the work interesting, even though what we are witnessing is merely a busy street scene in, I think, the Latin quarter of Paris. So I think he's an influence. I think late Derain is also an influence. Perhaps, I mean, Balthus was friends with Derain, but that was long after his Fauvist phase. And I think he liked Derain because he also adopted a quite classical conservative style that was at odds with the mainstream art world. And I think Balthus liked to align himself with a figure like that, someone who just does what they believe in rather than following the trends of the time. So I think Balthus is always an outsider. He was an outsider during his time. I mean, I don't think it's that easy to really categorize him. I think there's certain comparisons one can draw. Perhaps in the 20th century you might be inclined to compare his work to Lucian Freud to a certain extent. I think both artists' work have, they adopt a realist language and are in some ways, rather conservative and at odds with their time. But there's also something quite psychologically charged often about the works. I'd say Balthus probably goes, I think it's psychologically a bit richer than Freud's work. I think Freud often also just indulges in the pleasures of the eye, the flesh
Yeah.
of the human figure without looking that much
Yeah.
into...
I mean, it's also more portraiture rather than
Yeah.
narrative.
I mean, in a way, it seems a lot more, a lot less challenging than Balthus' work.
Yeah.
You know, even if he paints male genitalia, which, you know, Lucian Freud has done, I think there's less of a narrative element, and so that in a way makes it more palatable, even though, you know, many of his subject matter aren't pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other influences? What would you think? I mean, how would you...
No, I mean, it's just because when you look at Balthus, I guess he's quite successful doing that, going for the what's it called, timeless realism. Like, you can't. It's a bit hard to pin down where he's from if you just shown his work without knowing who he is. It could very well be from, like, I don't know, 18th century, 17th century or something if you didn't know anything about it. And well, at the same time, I feel like perhaps if it was less sort of adolescent girls eroticism, it's actually very much today's taste as well, the paintings. This very well painted works, and with a little bit of narrative and a bit of ambiguity and symbolism. It's very much what we like these days as well.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking, like, thinking about where he came from, as in the time where he came from. And his contemporaries were all doing, like, the figurative painters that I could think of in Paris were perhaps like Soutine, and earlier on maybe like Modigliani, and later, like, at the same time, like Picasso and all of that in the 30s and the 40s.
But I mean,
it's quite hard to see, like, how he fits in the group.
Yeah, but in a way, maybe he's also kind of a model for today's art world. I mean, I think many of the painters that, you know, have this ambiguity, or in general contemporary art right now, you can't really box it in. I mean, I think some people, you know, I think it's a big, you know, it's a cacophony of different artists working today, producing different works, and they're all, you know, cherry picking art history as they see fit. And in a way, I think Balthus did the same. I mean, if you look at work from today, say, I mean, I don't know, like, you know, this kind of Sarah Buchner or whatnot, as an example, you might cherry pick and, you know, put on her, I don't know, Kai Althoff, maybe you'd also, you know, associate with her, like, Bonnard and whatnot. It's in a way a cherry picking mentality. Or if you pick someone like, I don't know, something completely different, like, say, those abstract painters like Jadeh Fado-Joutimi, you know, you'd probably, you know, somewhat associate them with you know, the second generation Abex painters, such as, you know, I don't want to go into details, and obviously it's, you know, it's not a very deep analysis here, but, you know, you or Pam Evelyn, you would broadly align them with Helen Frankenthaler and Lee Krasner and whatnot, and in a way it's hard to really come up with a style of our times. I mean, I think trends last for shorter times than they used to, and in a way it's a lot more messy as to, you know, is that the style of today? You know, abstraction, is that now the style? Is it surrealism? I mean, I think that there's a bit...
They're all happening at the same time.
Yeah, and in a way, I think Balthus was also in his own time just cherry picking, and I think he had the benefit of being very independently minded, and I think that helped him just pursue his own path.
Yeah. So, lastly, do you have a favorite painting of Balthus?
I can't really say I do. I mean, first of all, I have not seen nearly enough of his work in the flesh.
So we need to...
I guess we have to go to the MoMA storage and see them all, but I really don't know. I mean, also in terms of...
Is there anywhere we can see a Balthus apart from the one in Gagoisan?
I mean, Well, in Lausanne there is a self-portrait on view right now in the museum.
Ah.
Tate has several works, not the best ones, but they're also not on view. I mean, in general, I think probably England is the wrong place for that. I mean, I think, Britons are always quite prudish, and so I think that's really at odds with
Without taste.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll get to see more of Balthus in the future, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.